What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update on Baldur's Gate 3 via Larian's Community Update 24, which covers a wide variety of topics, but most importantly, it covers some of the community's most pressing questions, many of which have been asked to me directly, and this seemed like the perfect time to talk about them, as well as Larian's plans specifically, now that we have an update on what exactly they're planning to do about it. As Update 24 is essentially a list of immediate priorities as they look towards the future, and right away they let everyone know that Patch 2 is just around the corner in their own words, though they did not give a specific time frame for this, but all of the language around this seems to suggest it is imminent, so I would expect probably a week or so maybe, but again, speculation, they did not give an official date on that. However, Patch 2 is supposed to be coming with more bug fixes, of course, much like Patch 1, which I didn't cover because it was just entirely bug fixes, but Patch 2 will also be bringing performance improvements specifically to Act 3, which is where they say we will feel it the most, but there will be performance improvements in general. But performance in Act 3 slips a little bit with constant frame rate drops, that kind of thing, so it appears, hopefully, that will be fixed for at least some people soon. But Patch 2 is also bringing us a better ending for Karlach, one of the origin characters, who I mentioned both in my review and a video on the companions, or the origin characters specifically, was incredibly lackluster, and while I don't really want to get into it too much here, was a sentiment that was felt by pretty much most of the community. Her ending was incredibly depressing and there really wasn't much you could do about it. But Patch 2 aims to be addressing that in some form, though they do not specify what exactly. Now that's it for Patch 2 primarily, but they also went on to explain a few other things. Starting with a conversation around the cut content people had felt the game was missing. From Act 3 in particular, there was a lot of discussion about this, and it would appear that Larian, after aggregating everyone's Reddit threads, comments, reviews, etc., broke it down into a few different issues. For starters, performance, both literal PC performance as well as the narrative in Act 3 in particular. Now on the technical side of things, Patch 2 should at the very least start to address that, but with the other part of it, the narrative, they broke that down into a few different things. Bugs, for starters, some of what people were referring to as cut content, or at least a little bit of it, are actually companion reactions and conversations that just aren't triggering properly that are supposed to be there, which is something they're actively looking into, but didn't give a lot of details beyond that. They do give an example here, though, of, for instance, Minthara's reactivity. Minthara can get stuck in a sort of cycle where she just doesn't offer any extra dialogue after a certain point, and this is apparently a bug that they're hoping to fix pretty soon because she is supposed to be saying more stuff. And before they gave a few more details, they did want to mention that some of the cut content people are referring to is also just discarded ideas that may have data associated with them and thus is in the files, but were never really implemented or were ever really planned on being implemented in some cases. They just kind of gave a disclaimer here that some of that cut content was cut deliberately and was never planned to be implemented because it didn't pass whatever test or user experience they were looking for. Now the two other big things they go on to talk about in terms of cut content are the Upper City and the Epilogues. Another common bit of feedback about the game as people are finally getting around to pushing through the end of it is that the Epilogues don't feel great. But one thing to keep in mind here, as this is such a big game and there are a lot of other games releasing, is that a lot of people still haven't actually beaten this game. The primary You Beat the Game achievement still only has about a 6% completion rate on Steam, and the PlayStation version hasn't even launched yet. So I do want to mention, before we start talking about the Epilogues, that there is a lot of feedback about them being incomplete, but I still want to avoid spoilers here because most people haven't seen them, period. In that regard, though, the Epilogues can be fairly underwhelming, though I do think this depends on how you got to that ending to begin with. For instance, my first sort of ending sequence that I got was fairly satisfying. It was only on replaying the game and save scumming through a variety of endings that I really started to realize that it wasn't exactly up to speed. Nonetheless, though, it is Larian's intention to flesh this out, starting with Karlach, of course, which we'll see right away in Patch 2, to give her a better ending, though we don't get a lot of details there. But it looks like they are actively working to expand the endings and the epilogues to include a lot of things that they had originally trimmed based on the feedback people gave. So some of that was cut because they felt the ending was going on on too long, but based on everyone's reaction, they're deciding to bring that up to pace really and put it back. Now, the last part that they go on to talk about in terms of cut content is the upper city. They mention that there are plans for the upper city of Baldur's Gate, which is a portion of the city that we don't really see hardly in game as it stands, was always meant to be a big cinematic epilogue bringing Baldur's Gate 3 to a close, and that they just didn't mention what their plan was there ahead of time because it was a huge plot spoiler, and it very much so is. Though, for the sake of this video, as briefly as I can put it, Baldur's Gate Upper City area is the ending of the game, essentially. There's a handful of fights there as you're moving towards a conclusion, and it's over pretty quick. The Upper City is very small. However, it would appear that, according to Larian, this is very much so their intention, and they're not planning on adding much to the Upper City in particular, mainly because the city of Baldur's Gate is already kind of chock full of content, and they say that they are confident with how it is now. Last but not least, they lay out a sort of rough roadmap of the future about things to expect going forward. First up, they mention that bugs, of course, are always going to be a priority for them. They're still trying to patch those as fast as they can, and I'm inclined to believe them because they've done exactly that in the past with games like Original Sin 2. In addition to that, they're starting to make improvements based on the feedback that we're giving to them, basically just incorporating the ideas and things like that they've seen being tossed around into the game. I've made a video on some things I would like to see, and that would kind of be the gist of it. However, another big feature that they're hoping to launch soon, as an example of this, is a wardrobe of wayward friends, they call it, that allows you to get rid of co-op party members who join your campaign, so you are not stuck with them permanently, as is the case now, because they can't be removed from your party, so this feature would allow them to be taken out. And they're also working on an ability to change our appearance in-game once we've actually started the campaign, as opposed to just character creation, though they don't have a release date anywhere in mind for that yet, but that's an example of the kind of improvements they are working on. Furthermore, they mention that there will be much more than that, and in particular, they really want to integrate mod support as well, so people can make mods more easily to flesh out this already pretty massive game. So with all of that stuff out of the way, just to kind of wrap this video up with my own thoughts and opinions on it, this is pretty much what I expected, and I think it more or less covers all the important bases. My probably main complaint about the game in terms of performance was just that Act 3 is rough, and I have about as high end of a computer as it gets, so if I'm having problems, I can almost guarantee other people are. So that and the bug fixes are expected and welcome, and then the other part of it, I would say the big part of it, the cut content. This was never much of a big deal to me personally. I play a lot of games, all games have cut content. I do think Larian had some missed marks when it comes to their marketing and messaging before the game's release, which by their own admission, they didn't have a ton of plans for. A lot of it kind of just happened. A lot of it was done spur of the moment because they were unsure of how to market it. So when we see some missed opportunities in terms of getting the record straight around things like the Upper City being added and its involvement, it's unfortunate, but not really a surprise. I am glad, though, that they are taking steps to implement what they can of that cut content via the epilogues, as that's the primary complaint I've seen, and one that honestly I kind of share. Because while they're not all bad by any means, a little more of a resolution to the story would be nice, just to kind of put a bow on it, so to speak. But all in all, honestly, a pretty great update. I'm glad they touched on a lot of this stuff, and truth be told, I'm kind of also glad I'm still working on my 100% review for this, because it means there's a good chance I'll actually see some of this before that review is done, so I can comment on it in that video. That's pretty much going to do it for right now. I certainly hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, let me know down below what you think about all this and things perhaps you would like to see Larian work on in the future. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.